We're in week one of the 2025 tax season, and it's time to start gathering those forms that you get in the mail, like your W-2, your 1099s, and more. And while you're putting it all together, you may think, why is this so complicated? And even, why am I even getting so much money pulled out of my paycheck? But the reality is, when it comes to taxes, Americans don't shoulder as heavy a burden as those in other advanced countries. I guess that's the silver lining here. Here to explain, we've got Yahoo Finance senior columnist Janna Herron. Janna, good to see you. Happy tax season.
Thank you. Back to you, I guess.
Yeah.
So I would say one way to measure our tax burden is by looking at how much of our tax revenue makes up of our GDP. And in the US, that percentage is about 25%, whereas the average for OECD countries is almost 34%. And then there are 9 European countries that are north of 40%. So we have a very low tax burden. What this looks like on a per person level is that a worker who makes the average wage in Europe pays almost $12,000 more in taxes a year than if they lived in the US. And a big reason for that disparity is something called the value added tax, or VAT, which over 170 countries worldwide use, but the US isn't one of them.
Right. And so can you expand on the difference between the VAT and then the US and our income tax system?
Sure. So the simplest way to think about a value-added tax, it's a very broad sales or consumption tax at the federal level. The tax not only applies to goods that you buy at the store, but also for services as well. So if you hire a contractor to do a home repair, in the US you pay him what? For his labor and for the materials used. But in countries with the VAT, you would also pay a value-added tax on top of that. So the VAT applies to much more in a country's economy and is typically much higher than a sales tax that we're used to. So it can range between 20 to 25%. And the result is that the VAT raises a lot of money. Now, in the US, as we know, our federal government collects taxes from us and from companies, and that's what they rely on to fund the federal government. And these taxes, income taxes, can be pretty low. So for those who make the lowest incomes, their tax rates are 10% or 12%. But we also have so many credits and deductions that even if you earn more, you can lower your tax burden. And some of that is offset by some of the highest earners in our country, which pay higher rates. We also have the benefit of having so many more higher earners in our country versus elsewhere. And then we also have corporations, very successful ones, paying into our tax system.
Yeah. So let's break down the US state and local taxes and how that comes into play versus other countries.
Sure. So in the US, the federal taxes make up about 2/3 of our tax burden. State and local taxes make up the rest. Depending on the state, you may pay income taxes to your state or your city, like New York City, sales tax and property tax, which is a pretty big one. The reason that our states tax so much is because they fund 2 very big elemental programs: our teachers and education, right, and the police force. In other countries, it's the federal government that funds these 2 things, along with other programs such as universal health care, parental leave, higher education, child care, and elderly care. Whereas in the US, those kinds of expenses we pay as Americans out of pocket, and that's kind of the trade-off for having a lower tax burden.
Good breakdown there, Janna. Okay, all right, we've got a lot of time left here in this tax season. Everybody can really kind of break down exactly what these systems mean for them, as well as we've all seen it show up in our paychecks. So, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks.